stream Q&A session. We go live on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, and I think Rumble as well. So we'll just jump right into it. The first question is from Lisa Hammond on Facebook, who asks, could you please review with us the symptoms of the cytokine storm during a case of COVID-19, at what day it typically appears, and what the proper treatments for it are? So it seems like implicit in the question is that, somebody would be waiting around for the cytokine storm to happen and, oh, look, there are the symptoms of it, let's start treating it. That's not the approach. You should treat it basically in advance, because when a thing starts is not always when the symptoms show up. And once the ball gets rolling, it's sometimes difficult to prevent the damage from it, right? So you want to avoid the damage from happening at all. So essentially the approach to treating COVID-19 is that you have to know the day one of symptoms. You have to be very careful at evaluating what was the first day of symptoms. And before day 8, you use, ivermectin, nitazoxanide, et cetera, all the usual stuff, maybe antihistamines, et cetera. But if you reach day 8, you start using steroids to prevent the cytokine storm, essentially. And what that does is it prevents complications from developing, and it prevents long COVID, which is one of the complications. It can be one of the worst, but it may not even be apparent that you have long COVID for some time. So you may not even be aware that you just went through a cytokine storm and you've set yourself up for long COVID until it does appear a little bit later than that, right? So anyway, a cytokine storm cytokines are inflammatory chemicals, mediators that the body uses to mediate inflammation. And, the symptoms are essentially just worsening of the symptoms of COVID, right? Like your fever goes up, you develop severe fatigue, shortness of breath, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes down, your cough gets worse, clotting issues get worse, you get confused, maybe a skin rash, various organs are not working properly. So liver, kidneys, heart can get inflamed. So it's hopefully that makes sense. Which is why when you get a treatment kit for COVID, it should have all the usual stuff, but it should also have steroids in case you need to treat on day 8. And since so many people were worried about measles or interested in measles, I wrote a long blog post on measles, and it turns out that the measles is also an RNA virus like COVID-19, and they have very similar pathologies. It also can lead to a cytokine storm, but probably happens on day 6 or day 7, probably happens a couple of days earlier. So to be safe, you would treat for a cytokine storm on day 6 of measles instead of day 8 to prevent long, quote unquote, long measles. I know that's not really a term, but people do get similar to long COVID, similar issues after measles. Not that measles is that big of a deal. I mean, it's more of a tempest in a teapot the last few decades, right? The CDC tracks, quote unquote, measles outbreaks, and it's like, okay, a handful of cases here, a handful of cases there, a death or two, this year, no deaths the next year. And mostly in people who are, sick from something else, right? Like they get severely sick, not so much because the measles is so terrible, but because their immune system shot, or they're deficient in vitamin A, as the case may be, and that's quite common in third world countries, perhaps less so here, perhaps not. Especially when you have populations like vegans who rely on beta carotene to be converted into vitamin A from plant sources. So we have to know all the facts, and we don't usually get all the facts. They don't tell us, okay, who was sick with the measles, what was their living situation? Had they just crossed over the border illegally, and were they living in like a camp or a bedroom of with 15 other kids who had been brought over by coyotes from Mexico, and of course they got sick because they're deficient in vitamin A, they're protein, energy, malnourished, and they're living with 15 other kids using one bathroom and one little bedroom in a little shanty somewhere, um, etc. Right? And how's their hygiene and all of that? And are they immunocompromised to begin with? Are they on? Do they have cancer? Are they like being treated for leukemia? So all these things play a role. And so for people who are generally healthy, it's not something to be worried about unless it somehow gets weaponized. And even then, I would, if reports of such a thing came out, I would, hesitate to buy into them until I see something with my own eyes. So it's easy for the media to highlight, just like they did in COVID. People have been through this before. That, oh my God, the world's ending. There's, people dying in the streets, and you don't see anything happening around you at all, right? They're like, okay, maybe that happened in New York. Maybe it happened in some select cities, and who knows what caused it. But who knows if it even happened there? I mean, maybe it's all some sort of Hollywood production. So you just have to be careful of what you believe. And then the most important things for treating COVID are nutrition, vitamin D, and for measles, vitamin A. Although in both cases, I think both vitamin D and vitamin A are actually quite important. They work together. They work synergistically. Chris Masterjohn recently highlighted on Facebook on Twitter, that we've known for like over 50 years that you can prevent the common cold if you take vitamin D and vitamin A together. So your immune system, to work properly depends on both. And vitamin D is really something that in most people indicates sufficient sun exposure. And if you get vitamin D from the sun, you get a lot more than vitamin D from sunlight than just the vitamin D. It synchronizes your circadian rhythms, which synchronize all of your hormones to be at the right levels throughout the day and night. And it stimulates POMC, pro-opiomelanocortin, that pathway, which that molecule splits into 10 hormones. It's a prohormone that splits into 10 hormones that are very important for human health. And it has anti-inflammatory benefits from the infrared, which you don't get when, you don't get as much of that, very little, when it passes through window light. It screens out like 40-50% of the infrared and UVA, which have these anti-inflammatory benefits. So you get, and it also stimulates, nitric oxide, and it just stimulates so many things that are really important for human health. And we basically are designed to be sun exposed, same as a plant, right? It just works in a different way in human beings. It structures the water in our body. It supports quantum biological effects that are necessary for our physiology to work and function properly. It supports our mitochondria. It supports our microbiome. So there's all these different things that the sunlight doesn't just bounce off the surface of your skin. It's actually absorbed like 4 inches into you at least. And it also travels through veins and arteries and lymphatic pathways, almost like they're fiber optic cables. Okay, it's incredible. So it actually reaches your gut, and it reaches all your mitochondria, and it basically it's irradiating your cells with information. So number one is sunlight, and number two is sleep. So everything in the universe has its opposite, right? Necessary counterpart, and the necessary counterpart to sunlight is the absence of sunlight, and which leads to sleep. So sunlight makes you feel invigorated, energized, and awake, and darkness makes you feel tired and sleepy. And if you don't expose yourself to artificial light at night, then you will go to sleep hours earlier. which is when you should be going to sleep. That's when your body's actually tired, unless you're artificially stimulating yourself with light from screens. And the way to shift your circadian rhythms into the right direction so that you're synchronized with Mother Nature and then you get optimally healthy is to go outside in bright daylight within almost immediately after waking up. You wake up, you go and expose yourself to bright daylight outdoors. And if you start to wake up earlier and earlier, you go outside when the sky starts to brighten, at dawn, and go outside. And this will shift your circadian rhythm forward, gradually. It doesn't take too long. It might take a few weeks to get yourself to the point where you're just naturally waking up around dawn and naturally passing out like an hour or two after sunset. Like within 2 hours of sunset, a human being should be asleep, would naturally be asleep. If you took them camping with no screens, no phones, just, natural means of illumination, fire, right? So if you took them camping, and fire is really not that bright when you get right down to it. There's not that much lux. There's not that much, like, how much does one fire, light up an entire room? Not as much, not that much. It's pretty dim. And so it doesn't affect your circadian rhythms the way all these lights do that we turn on. And also it's a different spectrum, right? It doesn't have as much blue light in it. So number one is sun, number two is sleep, and then there's a bunch, there's other stuff, grounding, and just being healthy in general, not being overweight. Those are the most important things for any viral infection, whether it's COVID-19, measles, or the flu, for that matter. So this brings up bird flu. So bird flu has re-entered the chat, as they say, and Peter McCullough is talking about a mutation to the bird flu virus that he's worried about may make it more transmissible and more pathogenic and more dangerous, for animals and possibly humans. And he's highlighted that small, handful of cases in humans have been severe, and they've died. So at this point, there's no cause for alarm. If anything, we're unfortunately creating the pandemic amongst our chickens ourselves by culling all of these healthy birds who would have developed immunity to bird flu, right? Like it's just utterly ridiculous and bizarre that we take a population of chickens and, a few of them get infected with the bird flu. At the first, sign that this population of chickens has caught the bird flu, you just kill all of them, not just the ones who are sick, but all of them. And obviously, like, others have caught the virus, they haven't started showing symptoms yet, and others will get sick and they'll make others sick, and etc. But let nature take its course. Let the ones that are going to die, let them die, and the ones that survive will now be immune to bird flu, right? Like, you don't have to kill all of them, just wait a couple of weeks, right? Like, tell the farm, stop everything, just feed them and let them out in the sun instead of keeping them cramped up inside the box, indoors, if you can, if you even have the setup to do that, if you have free range available. But even if not, right, just, I don't know, maybe give them some UV lamps, but regardless, even if you have none of that set up, just let it go through. Let it kill the ones it's going to kill. And the ones that are left are now immune. Great. Now you don't have to worry about bird flu anymore. But instead of that, they literally put these small independent family farms out of business. They wipe out their entire flock, reimburse them for some, calculated number that, weren't going to catch it or weren't sick or whatever. And, but they shut them down, and usually it runs them out of business. So anyway, it's another rabbit hole. But the point here is that bird flu is imminently treatable, just like any other flu, just like the measles, right? So the measles, in that long article I recently published, you find it on my Substack, I go through all the pathophysiology of the measles and how it's basically mirrors the pathophysiology of COVID-19. And so the treatments are essentially the same. It's like, it's just the timeline is slightly different. You have to start as early as possible. With ivermectin, it works. The data that we have on measles going back decades, shows that ribavirin works to reduce mortality 100% in some small trials, and vitamin A has reduced mortality up to 65%, according to the WHO themselves. And but the issue is that ribavirin has a lot of side effects, and they can be severe, and so people hesitate to use it, and as they should. But ribavirin does, all the stuff that ribavirin does, ivermectin does. The same mechanisms of action. And ivermectin doesn't have those severe side effects. So just use ivermectin is what I would say. If you really need to treat measles. And so similarly, ivermectin, probably works against all RNA viruses. So ivermectin very, very likely works against the flu. And the FLCCC, last I checked, I think recommends ivermectin for the flu too. Other organizations like the Wellness Company, which unlike the FLCCC actually sells prescription medications and med kits, the way we do at my go-to doc. The Wellness Company recommends Tamiflu, which I think is not as safe or as effective as ivermectin would be for the flu. So I would actually recommend stocking up on ivermectin if you're worried about bird flu or regular flu or COVID or measles or right? Like basically, if you're worried about getting a viral infection, if you're at risk, and you're worried about the long haul symptom, issue that can happen with any viral infection, and you're worried about bioweapons and bioterrorism, then ivermectin is really the thing to have on hand. Nitazoxanide can be very helpful too, although it's a lot more expensive than ivermectin. Hydroxychloroquine can be helpful as well. But I think ivermectin is the choice par excellence for these issues. And so that's what I would recommend if, the next pandemic turns out to be bird flu or, measles, like there's a CDC tracker for the measles, right? Like we're tracking the measles and they're reporting we have one death, just like, the way people remember checking the CDC tracker website for COVID-19 early on. It seems like they're spinning up the same thing for the measles. They have it for the flu. I don't know if they have it for the bird flu yet, but it's like the media, as usual, is trying to. They've been doing this for generations, actually, not just one generation, but they've been spinning up these hysterias, these tempests and teapots for generations, for decades, as every time there's a suspected or confirmed, quote unquote outbreak of any of these diseases that they vaccinate for. So I think that if you look at these things in their proper perspective, there's a lot worse happening in our world than these tiny tempests and teapots, as John Bedoin keeps trying to highlight. We've had 250,000 excess deaths from kidney failure in the last few years since the pandemic. And obviously there's what could be described metaphorically as a pandemic of deaths from a lot of things, right? They may not be infectious diseases, but they could be qualified as like socially infectious, right? So, there's so many people dying from fentanyl overdoses, and there's people dying from, deaths of despair. There's a lot of people in the United States dying from a lot of different things. Obviously, cancer gets worse and worse every year. There's a lot of people dying from heart disease. And you might say, okay, heart disease and cancer aren't, socially contagious to kind of things, but I would argue they are actually. There's something about them that if your neighbors are chronically sick, you're more likely to be chronically sick with cancer and high blood pressure and heart disease and et cetera, on and on. So like the lifestyle is socially contagious in a sense, right? Like you tend to and if your spouse, has something, you're more likely to have, chronic illness. So um, all of these things track with along social graphs. So, and perhaps more of them than we know are related to infectious organisms. And it wouldn't be surprising. It's not so much that the organism causes the disease, right? As a lot of people who, like, there's an interesting follow on Twitter, Ramiz Sanders, who has great content. And, his perspective is that traditional um, perspective of the terrain, right? The terrain over the pathogen, that the pathogen is, it's kind of like what you see in nature, in natural ecosystems, and our body is a natural ecosystem. So in natural ecosystems, you'll have, when something dies, right, a tree dies, it gets, filled up with all kinds of bacterial organisms that help to digest it and get rid of it. When our own tissues are diseased or they die, bacteria come in and eat us up too, right? In the grave, they come and digest us and return us to the earth. So that process happens along a spectrum, so diseased tissues will, let in more of these pathogens who are there to kill off the cells that are weakest, right? So they kill off the weakened cells, the sick cells, the cells that are full of toxins and are not working properly. And the point is that your body, while you retain life, will create new cells to take their place that will be stronger, right? So you're developing essentially herd immunity, right, within your cells to these pathogens. So you, um, just like the chickens, the chicken flocks, you let the pathogens do their job and kill off the weakest cells, and then the strong survive and fight off, and then your immune system, tames the pathogens, gets rid of them, and they just go back to normal. They're basically the microbiome, waiting. They like, the microbiome can become pathogenic, right? Um, and and even if you didn't have the pathogen laying in wait within your microbiome, like, for example, people talk about staph infections. Staph is literally part of your microbiome. It's probably the number one component on the bacterial side of the microbiome in your skin. And so, yeah, obviously staph infections are very common. If you have some skin dysfunction, they can infect you. Even MRSA, right? So methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, that has been created by antibiotic use, right? And so, yeah, people say, oh, that's pathogenic, but it's just part of people's skin microbiome in a lot of cases, many cases. So that's one perspective. And I'm not saying that you never need to help your body kill off pathogens, because the people who need help are the people who have been malnourished in one sense or another for decades. And it's not just the third world. We've also been malnourished in a lot of ways. And, I choose the word nourished specifically because over nutrition, other than, instead of malnutrition, because it's not just food. It's not just micronutrients from food. It's also sunlight and sleep and intimacy and, good vibes. You need all of these things. You need good emotions and you need good thoughts, right? As well. So you need all of these different things in order to be properly nourished, and people don't have them. And so when they are lacking, the body gets weaker and weaker, and tissues get affected by toxins and pathogens, as I've talked about a lot. And then they get sick, and those pathogens are doing a lot of different jobs there. One of them is binding toxins, helping your body deal with toxins, and one of them is destroying, the weakened cells, like I was saying before. And this can get out of hand in some people, and they can get worse into a negative spiral, where they get worse and worse, and they need some help. And the main help that they need is to nourish them appropriately so that their body has the resources it needs to rebuild strong, healthy cells that won't be killed by the pathogens and will reassert dominance in the situation, essentially. But that can be a prolonged process, and to speed it up, while you're focusing on the nourishment, the nutrition and the nourishment, you also start to beat back the pathogens and give the person some hope as their symptoms become less due to that process of killing off the pathogens slowly. You can't do it too quickly. You have to do both of them slowly. So Cindy Hammer says, is hormone replacement a good option for perimenopausal women, especially if COVID affected their hormones? I don't think that hormone replacement is a good option for anyone usually. It's the same. You can look at this the same way, through the same lens that you view any disease process or anything that's not normal. In traditional healthy societies, there's obviously a change. Like your body changes as you enter perimenopause and menopause, but it's not this what women in America experience, right? What women in America experience is a pathological transition. It's not normal. It comes with a lot of terrible symptoms, and they feel really bad. So if you use hormones, it's a easy way out quickly. But just like any other pathology, that easy solution is a hack. It doesn't actually fix the root cause. The hormonal imbalance is a secondary cause. It's somewhere along the chain of events that leads to the symptoms. It's not the first event in the chain, right? Like, you have to ask why, and it's not okay because I'm in perimenopause that my hormones are doing this and that's causing my symptoms. That's not the ultimate answer either. Like, yeah, I mean, that's obviously that's that's true in a sense, but it's trivially true. Okay, that's not the whole answer. Like, of course you can say, okay, I'm in perimenopause, but it's kind of circular reasoning, right? Like, my perimenopause is causing my hormones to change. Hormones changing mean I'm in perimenopause. I mean, it's like, okay, fine. They both mean the same thing. But why are you experiencing symptomatic perimenopause the way that you are? And so that's the real question. And that question is surprisingly usually due to estrogen toxicity. And the reason it's surprising is that the thing that you treat with for perimenopause is usually estrogen, right? You usually give estrogen to help people feel better because you see that their estrogen levels in the blood are dropping, but actually tissue estrogens and xenoestrogen levels, or estrogen receptor binding at the tissue level, there's often excess estrogenic activity at tissue levels that you can't detect in the blood. So it's in the tissues, not in the blood. But it's more complicated than that. I think that we need to do some work on this, and hopefully I'll publish something on this, and then I'll be able to talk about it in more detail and more intelligently. But to begin with, the pathology is the same as any pathology. It must be, because there's just a short list of things that make people sick in any way, that make a transition not happen the way it's supposed to. So a transition like perimenopause is not happening in the healthy, natural, easy way that it's supposed to, because you have toxins and pathogens and lack of nourishment. That's all it is, right? So that's the real root cause. And the lack of nourishment for women oftentimes will be related to their relationships, right? So they're more susceptible to relationship deficiencies. And so women may not want to hear this, but you may need to get your relationships right. And oftentimes the primary relationship is with a man. So your health may depend on your man, or at least your relationship with your man. I'm not saying it depends on him. It depends on the way you relate to him, right? If you have a man in your life who's important. but also all your other relationships are also important. But the primary relationship, whatever it is obviously going to be the most important, whether that's with your daughter or, you know, your sister or your brother or your husband or whatever it is, whatever the case may be. So that relationship, you have to get it right. And, you know, people don't want to hear that. They just want, I mean, that's not easy. You know, that has usually been dysfunctional for decades at that point, and they don't want to change themselves to change their relationship, right? They want to blame the other person that, if, you know, this jerk keeps doing this and blah, blah, blah. That's why we have a bad relationship. You just have to let go of all of that, take radical responsibility for yourself and your relationships, right? Like the way that you relate to somebody else is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, like, obviously you can't force them to change, but oftentimes people do change. Okay. So like if you've got these two people fighting each other, you know, one hits the other and the other hits back and the other hits back and the other hits back. And eventually it goes on so long, they forget who hit who first, and it's just tit for tat, right? That's what a dysfunctional relationship turns into, a tit for tat, right? No one knows who started it. It doesn't really matter who started it, right? Like you've both kept it going, and really you're both to blame in a sense, right? So if one person just stops, the other person might keep hitting for a while, but eventually they're probably going to get tired and stop. You know, they're going to go on and start hitting somebody else. You know, somebody else is hitting them from behind, and they'll turn around and start hitting that person instead of hitting you. And especially if you start to treat them really well, eventually they'll usually respond in kind. So you get what you put out there. So that's just like a natural law, right, of the universe, that applies at every level. It applies to your relationships, it applies to your job, it applies to your health, it applies everywhere, right? So yeah. So the most important thing, and there was a blog post, a woman's health may depend on a good man, that I wrote at blog.mygotodoc.com, that spoke to a lot of people. And, you know, I was surprised that people did accept the truth when they saw it, right? So maybe I didn't explain it as well here as I did there, but take a look. And in that one, I did also focus on estrogen excess and how to detoxify it. But again, the starting point there, as here, is always going to be the relationships, especially in women, and other kind of like higher levels, the way that they think about their lives in the world, and, you know, whether they feel victimized or not, and whether they've taken personal responsibility for things, and whether they've let, traumas, whether they've just let them go or whether they've held on to them, right, in an unhealthy way, and just re-traumatized themselves by holding on to the thing and remembering it, and, you know, turning it over and over, and just letting it be a constant presence, right? So it's like PTSD, right? When the trauma stays with you, you have to process it, digest it, and let it go, right? So bad things happen in this world. That's just the nature of this world. And you just let them go and you move on, right? You learn your lesson from them and you move on. So those are the most important things. And then you have to get rid of all the xenoestrogenic exposures and all the, you like women, especially, again, are affected by all these like personal care products that are full of all these different hormones or things that have hormonal effects on them that men are not as affected by because they just don't use them as much, right? Like a man can literally get through life without using any personal care products. I mean, other than a toothbrush, they're oftentimes happy to brush their teeth with their own saliva, right? Like, and take a shower and not use shampoo. And, in a pinch, they might use some soap if they start to smell really bad, or maybe not. Maybe they'll just take more showers, right? Or maybe they'll just let themselves smell bad, but they won't use, makeup and conditioner and toner and this and that and base and, all these different things. It's just true, right? So you have to address all of those things, and either the only solution for most people is to make them at home from real natural ingredients, because like it's very hard to find ones that are made without chemicals in a truly natural way. And if you do, then they're very expensive, especially the cosmetics. So less or no cosmetics, or just super all natural ones, and then all the rest, right? The soaps and the shampoos and the conditioners and the, the body oils and the body scrubs and the this and the that, they all have to be natural, and get rid of the incoming toxicity. And then you do things like broccoli sprouts to help get rid of the xenoestrogens that are inside you. And it's a lot more than that. I mean, there's herbs and stuff that can help. But people think that, or they'll just Google like, okay, cistanch or this, that herb or that herb. Like I'll use this or that. Google tells me that this herb helps with perimenopausal symptoms. That's too simplistic an approach, right? You need to talk to somebody who's really an expert, and they have to be talking about more than just your symptoms. Okay, they have to be talking about what the root cause is. They have to be telling you, okay, you need to fix this relationship, that relationship. You need to think about your life in this way. You need to do these, breathing exercises to help calm your nervous system down, right? Like all chronic disease, there's a huge contribution from nervous system imbalance, where you're in the fight or flight mode instead of in the parasympathetic mode. And almost all of us are leaning towards sympathetic. And so all diseases have the same root causes, really. The way that they express just depends on you personally, right? So before perimenopause starts, you have certain, symptoms, or maybe you have none, but you're the same person. Once perimenopause enters, you're taking yourself into perimenopause, and whatever you're bringing into perimenopause is what creates the symptoms of perimenopause. It's the unresolved toxicity, toxic burden, and pathogenic burden, and sick disease tissues, essentially, that are under a lot of stress, undue stress, unnatural stress. And they have been under unnatural stress for usually years or decades, and you're just not aware of it, right? So they've been putting up with all of this stress. Now there's a new added stress, which is the hormonal milieu, the environment inside your body. The hormonal environment is changing, and they're not able to deal with that change and maintain the balance of health that you enjoyed before. So it's just an added stressor. It's just the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's always the last straw that breaks the camel's back. It's not. The point is, you have to realize, when a natural system breaks down, there were a multitude of stressors affecting that system, pushing it off of balance, before the last final little nudge was able to throw it off of balance. Excuse me for a second. I have to turn off something. Okay. So the question of, is hormone replacement a good option for perimenopausal women, is a complicated answer. Even if you want to answer it simply, like, there are certain versions of hormone replacement that are better than others, but they're not the best option either, right? So you can go to like a regular endocrinologist or OBGYN and get like synthetic hormone replacement, which is kind of like a blunt hammer, and maybe it'll help and maybe it'll work, but it'll cause a lot more symptoms than bioidentical hormone replacement from like a functional medicine practitioner who is trying to balance multiple hormones at the same time and has a more nuanced perspective to all of this. But that is still a blunt hammer approach to an extremely complex natural system. It cannot take into account all of the things that are off, because it's not really going to the deepest root cause. So you have a spectrum of options from, and just because the option grew on a plant doesn't mean that using that option is the best approach, right? It could be part of a good approach, right? But again, it's on a spectrum of things. Like, you can use something from a plant in a way, like within a paradigm of treatment, which is the same as the paradigm of the modern medical system, which is, okay, I see symptom, this thing works for that symptom, I give that thing, symptom goes away, yay, we're all happy. Like, that's the same basic approach, whether you're using a hormone or you're using a plant that has hormonal effects, right? Like, it's still using a hormone, right? It's just a better version. It's a more, biologically compatible version than even the bioidentical hormones, right? So the herbs are, I'm not saying they're bioidentical hormones, but they're more biocompatible, right? So they're compatible with the your ecosystem, right? So the human ecosystem is like a supercomputer in a sense, and there's a certain programming language that can interface with that supercomputer and get it to do things that are healthy responses. Okay. And the programming language that interfaces with it is the language of nature, right? So the thing like natural means and methods they make sense to your ecosystem. So it's because your ecosystem is designed to fit into the super ecosystem around you, right? You're a little piece of a bigger ecosystem. Now, when you take yourself out of the bigger ecosystem and put yourself in an unnatural environment, which is your home and your modern industrialized society, but even just your home is an unnatural environment. Okay. The more comfort and the more layers of abstraction away we are from actual nature, the further we are from a natural environment, the more alien an environment it is. So the more you put yourself in you've extricated yourself from the natural ecosystem and all the natural signals that somebody like me sitting outside is getting compared to somebody sitting inside in a cubicle with artificial lights shining on them. So the more unnatural the ecosystem is, the more you need to rely on shifting back to a natural, situation, a natural environment, because all the natural signals are what tell your body that I am safe and I can express a state of health instead of a state of disease. Because the unnatural environment is literally hostile. It's like being on Mars, right? There's a spectrum from natural Earth environment to Martian environment or lunar environment that will kill you in an instant, right? And along that spectrum, somewhere along that spectrum from perfect environment to perfectly inhospitable environment or perfectly lethal environment, so perfect hospitability over to perfect lethality, somewhere along that spectrum is your home and your job and your car, and, obviously it's not that far towards the lethal side, but it's much farther than, the environment used to be 100 years ago and 200 years ago and 500 years ago and 1,000 years ago and 100,000 years ago. So it's just not, it is a inhospitable environment that you're in. And so the treatments can be seen through the same lens, that they're on a spectrum from, perfect treatment, which addresses all the root causes, which is essentially what my partner Shabazz is trying to do for you. So you can find him at mygotodoc.com/Hakim. And his first name is not Hakim. Hakim is like the word for doctor in Ayurvedic medicine. He doesn't just do Ayurvedic medicine. He is basically a naturopath, but even that term doesn't succinctly describe him. It doesn't properly encompass what he does. He basically does real healing, right? Like there is no proper word for it today because it just doesn't exist, right? Like he's reinventing the wheel essentially that has fallen out of, has fallen into, people forgot how to make the wheel and he's reinventing it for them. So real healing has been lost and he's bringing it back. He's reviving it. He's reviving the healing sciences essentially. And it's a process of rediscovery and sifting through like an archaeological record of ancient civilizations that were not passed down in, completely to us, right? So you've got all these like foundational source texts in each of these great natural, old ancient healing traditions, and they're all incomplete and they've all been like altered and changed over time, and we've lost large parts of their corpus. And and it takes somebody with a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom, and a lot of knowledge of both modern and ancient principles to rebuild them into an edifice that makes sense, and to change the methods for the modern world, right? So the thing that an ancient Indian needed to do, or somebody in ancient China needed to do to heal themselves from diabetes, is completely different than what we need to do, because the causes of our diabetes are a lot different, or there's other ones as well as the ones that ancient Chinese person would have been dealing with. So healing, not only the art of it has been lost and the science of it has been lost over the eons, but also it needs to be updated because it's a lot harder to heal somebody nowadays than it was back then, just because their environment is so inhospitable, and they've usually done the wrong thing for so long in such toxic ways, right? Using the wrong approaches, like with medications and just symptom management, essentially, for so long that the system has gotten more and more and more out of whack. And so yeah, so bioidentical would be better on a spectrum of like perfect to terrible. And using herbs would be better than that, and using lifestyle changes would be better than that, and really digging into the deepest root causes, getting rid of the toxins that are in your body, doing a detox protocol, which involves significant change to your diet and your exercise. And Cindy, if you're you know um, somebody in your life is personally dealing with this, get in touch with me directly, and let me know if maybe that person would be appropriate for going through one of the protocols with Shabazz, and us paying for it, and as part of our program of trying to find people who have some sort of illness that is widely applicable, right? So before I said you have to be severely sick, right? And willing to do everything Shabazz says, and willing to document it, and then we'll pay for everything, right? We'll pay for the consults, we'll pay even for the treatments that are recommended. You just have to do them, right? But I think rather than just focusing on people who are severely sick, it's might be better to focus on people who have broadly applicable problems, like, for example, perimenopause. It applies to most women nowadays, right? Like, and it can cause significant issues. So if somebody's going through a typical perimenopause and struggling with it, and is willing to document it in detail and do everything recommended, and they have at least somewhat of a platform to do so, then they may be a good candidate for this program, where we're trying to find people to pay for their protocol, who can help us expand awareness on the way that these protocols work and heal people. And the protocol really has to be individualized, and there's no one that I trust beyond Hakeem Shabazz Ahmed. So he's who I would choose for myself, and I have chosen for myself and for my own family. And I would start there instead of ending there, where most people will start somewhere else and gradually be dragged either into their grave, or to somebody like Hakeem Shabazz, who finally fixes all of the things that they did wrong along their very long healing attempt. And what makes this difficult is that most people don't realize that's what they've done to themselves over the course of their lives, with all of their quote unquote natural treatments or unnatural treatments, because they'll see that, oh, my symptoms went away, yay, I fixed the problem. You usually didn't fix the problem, you usually just covered it up, and then what looks like a new problem pops up, but it's the same old problem. It's the same toxicity and pathogenicity and lack of nourishment that caused your last problem is causing a new problem. It's just worse now, and it's now popped up in another place. It's whack-a-mole. You're playing whack-a-mole. You're dealing with pressure in a system, and you just keep plugging holes, right? Like that little Dutch boy putting his finger in the dam that broke, and the holes start popping up, and the leaks start springing up all around him. You can't just stick your finger in the hole and stop the symptom from popping out. You gotta fix the dam, right? You gotta reinforce the dam. So hopefully that makes sense to people. Solid Oak says, what's the best approach to address small intestinal bowel obstruction? Small intestinal bowel overgrowth, SIBO. So, which might lead to bowel obstruction in like the extremity of severity. But anyway, small intestinal bowel overgrowth, it's the same answer, right? Unfortunately or fortunately, I think it's fortunate that medicine's not really that complicated, okay? So the answer is get rid of the toxicity and the pathogenicity, and and nourish yourself properly. And along the way, what that means is obviously you have to change dramatically what you put into your mouth. At least short term, you have to completely alter your diet. Longer term, I don't think people, the failing of functional medicine, most functional medicine approaches, is that they rely on dietary change, and it begins and ends with dietary change. And they may charge you thousands of dollars for all of these different tests and give you hundreds of dollars of supplements and do all this stuff, but really the 80% or the 90% even, or even the 99% of the benefit just comes from the lifestyle changes that you make talking to the functional medicine doctor. Number one, being reassured that this thing can get better without getting surgery or chemo or taking medications or going to a regular doctor. And there's just this reassurance, right? Like a placebo effect that, oh, it's not as bad as all these MDs made me think. And number two, all of the lifestyle changes that people make when they go to a functional medicine doctor, they change what they eat, and they change how they sleep, and they change how they think and how they feel, and their, sun exposure, and, their exercise patterns, and all this stuff changes. And no wonder, their health changes dramatically. It's not all the supplements so much as it is just all the other stuff, right? So yes, that approach works, but oftentimes it doesn't always get to the deepest root causes. It may. I'm not saying that all functional medicine doctors are terrible or they're not doing the right thing, but the best ones, what they're going to be addressing is all of the physical causes. The even better ones, right? The truly fantastic ones are going to address the causes that underlie those, which are your emotional being, your emotional self, and trauma, and all of that stuff, right? Psychological issues that then give birth to physical dysfunctions that then give birth to symptoms, right? So you have to go down the causal chain to the very, very beginning if you want truly deep healing and you don't want more problems to pop up in the future. So even like what looks like holistic medicine, right, on the surface, may not actually be holistic if it's just focused on the physical. And even if it's focused on the physical and some of the mental and emotional aspects, but ignores, some spiritual issues that might be affecting the person. So you have to really keep digging until you get to the bottom of everything. So the best approach to SIBO, again, it's like along a spectrum. Like you can take rifaximin, and or like black walnut, concentrated black walnut extract, or oregano, and a handful of all these herbs. So again, we're moving from the spectrum of like worse to better. So rifaximin will work in like many cases in the sense that the symptoms will go away. Obviously, if you add dietary changes on top of that, it'll be even more effective. But oftentimes the dietary changes, if you just rely on those, like you could start eating carnivore, and for most people, all their gut symptoms disappear on carnivore, right? Does that mean you've cured your problem? No, unless you can go back to eating a normal diet, right? So there are these like extreme maneuvers you can make. You can take, you can rely on medicine to kill off, to pare back all the bad stuff and get rid of your symptoms. You can rely on herbs to do the same exact thing. They work just as well as the rifaximin and are probably better, just because it's more of a natural approach to speaking to your body. So there will be fewer side effects. Or you can rely on extreme dietary changes, or you can combine all of these together. But the underlying deeper issue of why has your small intestine become weakened to the point that these pathogens have multiplied so much and your own microbiome has let them in. And obviously, antibiotic use plays a role in this problem, and taking probiotic foods and probiotic medications may play a role in making it better. So Mutaflor, for example, is a probiotic that we've had great success with. You have to order it from Canada, and they try to get it to you before it gets affected by before its temperature drops too low. So you have to get it. They only send it out on like, certain days, I think Monday and Wednesday maybe. But anyway, Mutaflor in Canada, not available in the US. That can be part of the protocol. But you can't just rely on probiotics because your microbiome is composed of like thousands of different bacteria, and the probiotic, it's the one that you take or the handful that you get in the probiotic, are they're associated with some improvement in symptoms, but they're not actually fixing the problem, and it's very difficult to get them to take root in your body and actually like remain and then multiply. And so I mean, if you had access to a properly screened and administered fecal transplant, that could be a part of the solution, although it doesn't have to be at all, right? Like most people are disgusted by the thought, and as well they should be. But you can solve these problems without spending a lot of money and without taking a lot of time in a very direct way if you go to somebody like Shabazz who really knows what they're doing, and they can design something that works right out of the gate and then redesign along the way as needed when new things crop up and new issues crop up until the problem gets solved. So yes, the plain and simple answer is the best approach is the most comprehensive approach that addresses the deepest root cause. And even the antibiotic use is not the deepest cause, right? So you have to ask, why was the resilience of the body so low that it couldn't deal with the antibiotics? That's what you have to ask. And yes, like the insults that can come into a natural system can be so great that they overwhelm any level of natural resilience. Like a bullet tearing through your flesh, right? It doesn't matter how optimized your health is, the bullet's not going to bounce off your chest, right? Unless it's a miracle that happens, but or you're Superman. So the pathogen or the toxin can be so severe that it can overwhelm a natural system, but those are extremely rare, few and far between. And it's like it would be one. Even the ones that appeared to be that way throughout history, they were really, the problem was more the sanitation and the overcrowding, plague and Black Death, all these different things throughout history were really problems of sanitation, overcrowding, malnourishment, etc. Right? Lack of sunlight, living in urban centers in ways that weren't natural anymore. So the people weren't optimally healthy. Once you were in that situation, it's possible that somebody optimally healthy could succumb once it started to get going. But if that person, found themselves in the countryside, they would be far more likely to make it, than if they were in the overcrowded city with people getting sick all around them. And okay, so the best approach to SIBO is the most comprehensive and deepest approach. And that will be the safest approach because the symptom or the bundle of symptoms that you're dealing with are not your real problem. That's what you have to understand. They're very uncomfortable, but they're just messages to you, right? They're basically pain signals, right? So pain feels bad, but it's not actually bad. The thing that's hurting you is the bad thing, and the pain is telling you to get away from it. That's simply all it is, right? So you want to be able to feel pain. You don't want to cover it up. You don't want to suppress it. You want to get away from the thing that's hurting you. And that's all disease is, right? There's something hurting you, or some bundle of things usually that are hurting you, and your body's telling you that they're there by giving you symptoms. That's the long and short of disease, okay? So you have to interpret the message properly. You have to understand it. And then you have to know, okay, what is it that's causing this message, right? Like you have to be able to read the message to realize what the problem is. And there's only so many things that it can be: toxins, pathogens, lack of nourishment, right? There's a lot of subcategories to those, yes, and it's very complicated. But in in a village, in the wilderness, in the Amazon, somebody who understands how to heal people will understand that, okay, we're not going to be so concerned about blue light in this village in the middle of the Amazon that doesn't even have electricity, or like lack of grounding or whatever, right? We're going to be more concerned about other things in that situation. But still, they're all going to fall under the heading of toxins, pathogens, and lack of nourishment, right? Whereas, in an modern industrialized society, there's another list of things that we're going to be more concerned about in those people, right? As a group, which is why there's a lot of like the protocols are going to be very similar, surface wise, but deeper down, everyone is completely different, right? And the only one who can truly diagnose you is you, because you're the only one who experiences yourself from the inside, right? No one else can see your own experience of your own being except for you. So you have to report back from this unseen realm, which is your own soul, to everyone on the outside of it, right? There's like a universe within you, and it's out of order, and it's causing you to feel a certain way. And the only one who can really detect that is you yourself. A really skilled practitioner can predict, usually correctly, what the root causes are and what the psychological and emotional and intellectual issues are as well. But sometimes there's going to be some nuances that you're just going to have to report. You're just going to trust the person and tell them, right? So this is one aspect. All right, let's move on. There's a bunch of other questions. So measles, care for 7 and 12-year-old, and prevention. I mean, the prevention is just being healthy in the first place, and vitamin A and vitamin D, and good nutrition, and losing weight, and getting out in the sun and sleeping properly and fixing the circadian rhythms. I mean, that's the real prevention, and almost no one who does that will actually get severely sick. They'll recover well. And the treatment, if somebody's at risk, right, like a normal 7 and 12-year-old who aren't sickly, I wouldn't worry. I would just let them get sick and get better. But take a look at my blog post. I went through herbs and lifestyle and medications even for people who need them. And if somebody's, the more risky the situation, the more at risk the person is, the more you're going to err towards the side of using medications, and the less so that they are, the more you'll err towards the side of using herbs, or not even herbs, and just lifestyle, or just letting their body get through it and take care of it. So, one thing that we should mention is this fear of like erasing the immune memory, right? That people mention with the measles. And there's a great blog post that I wasn't even aware of, but that somebody posted in the replies to my article about measles on blog.mygotodoc.com. And she's also on Substack. For some reason, she deleted her reply in the link, but not before I saw it. So I replied to my own post and put her link back. And it shows why the immune erasure problem probably isn't real. Okay. So, and practically speaking, what we actually saw when we looked at people with measles, if we looked under a microscope, okay, some immune cells died off and they lost, the ability to produce antibodies to other infections that they had in the past, but they didn't actually become immunologically susceptible overall to those things, right? They didn't get all those diseases they'd had before, in severe ways, and go through all of them all over again. So their functional immunological memory remained intact, because it wasn't entirely dependent on just the antibodies, right? Or just those specific antibodies or whatever, right? So yes, it will infect and kill certain immune cells, but that doesn't like wipe your immune system, right? Okay. You're not left completely bare, right? Like a newborn baby. That's not the case. That's not the way measles actually works. So you need to and go and take a look at my blog post, take a look at the reply, read that article. It's very convincing. So, and we've known this for decades, for over 50 years, I think. She cites some sources that are pretty old. and nothing's changed, right? It just, the hysteria has gotten out of hand. That's what's mainly changed. So the treatment is the same. It's just that, and obviously younger people are the ones who are more at risk with measles than, people who are adults, middle-aged. So that might be, a risk factor the younger they are. But it's the same, right? It's the ivermectin, very safe in 7 and 12-year-olds, 0.2 to 0.4 milligrams per kilogram per day. And, you could go on longer the more at risk you are, because, you might continue for a month in somebody who's high risk to prevent the long haul type, version of that problem, measles, developing. Or other pathologies. And on day 6, you might use, some steroids and other things to minimize the immunological overreaction that may happen when you weren't properly nourished to begin with. So you can use, if you're caught off guard and you haven't had a chance to build up your vitamin A and vitamin D stores, then you can take 200,000 international units of vitamin A, hundreds of that, similar doses of vitamin D3 and cholecalciferol, and you should use retinol for vitamin A, especially short term, because it's the active form. So long term, people get concerned about toxicity from vitamin A. It's really not an issue if you go and look at Chris Masterjohn's work, as long as you're getting enough vitamin D. So vitamin A and vitamin D will prevent each other's toxicity from happening, essentially. So they just need to be balanced, right? The toxicity is not so much, it's basically just imbalance, right? You're getting too much of something. So as long as you get things in balance, so copper and zinc have to be balanced. So they're also helpful. So all the same things that you learned about COVID are helpful for the measles. So, and there's food sources that are available. You can, you can't get 200,000 in a day, but like with vitamin A, what they do is they give 200,000 a couple of times, 2-3 times, and that's it. They front load it, right? You could get, 400 to 600,000 international units of vitamin D over the course of a month through nutrition alone. That is possible, but yeah, you could take mega doses if you're caught off guard and you get the measles and you need to do something right away, or if the measles starts to go around and you want to boost yourself up right away. So those things can be done. Aisha Shum says, what are alternatives to ventilators? So BiPAP, CPAP, and they'll try those first, right? So regular oxygen, obviously. Treating the cytokine storm with steroids, although that's not going to be immediate. But sometimes there are only two options. You die or you get on a ventilator, right? So the problem is when the ventilator is done too quickly, but there are some people who will die if they don't get on the ventilator. That's just the long and short of it. The ventilator is harmful. It's not normal, right, to have such a strong, pressure of oxygen going into your lungs. That does cause damage. Ventilators cause harm, right? But sometimes it's worth it, that harm. And Pierre Corey has explained this pretty well. He has an article on his blog where he kind of like reorients people to like, hey guys, calm down. It's, in some cases you just had to use them. And if you get to the point where you literally can't breathe anymore and your lungs are full of fluid and you just can't breathe, and they put you on the oxygen and you still can't breathe, and they put you on the BiPAP and you still can't breathe. The problem in COVID was that people didn't feel like that. They didn't feel like they couldn't breathe, right? It was just people were looking at their pulse oxygen, reading, and that's what alarmed them. That like, oh my God, your oxygen's so low, it's dangerous, right? And the person was like, I feel fine. What are you talking about? But they, startled them and they made them afraid, and they got them onto the ventilator when obviously they didn't need it, right? Like the person felt completely normal. So the message here is believe how you feel, believe how the patient actually looks to you, instead of focusing entirely on the reading on a monitor that could be completely wrong, right? There could be something you don't understand about the physiology of the situation and the technology of the reading and the device that you're using to check it that could be misleading you, right? So believe your eyes, right? Just believe your eyes. That's the main message here. And if the person looks like they need a ventilator, and they tell you that they're dying here. Like, man, I can't breathe. I'm really struggling here. I feel like I'm, and then they pass out in front of you, and the oxygen monitor is also blaring alarms, and all the messages are telling you the same thing, that the person's dying without oxygen. Ventilate them. That's the answer. Okay. And so you need to understand that there, again, it's on a spectrum of treatments from perfect to really terrible, and it's lies somewhere on that spectrum. But it also depends on the situation of the specific person, right? So like the answer of which of these treatments is appropriate along that spectrum from more harmful to less harmful is going to depend on, okay, who's the patient that is presenting that's requiring treatment. If that patient is mildly sick and maybe they don't need oxygen at all, maybe their treatment is just breathe deeply, lay prone, prone positioning and breathe deeper. So the prone positioning was another issue that a lot of people didn't know about. The breathing got a lot better when they put them on their bellies, and even sometimes intubated them on their bellies, and this is like weird for modern medical physicians to like put somebody on their belly and tell them to breathe. And so it just wasn't done. It was like institutional inertia not allowing it to happen. It's like the same as like putting women up in the stirrups and like putting them on their back supine, on their back with their legs up in the air to give birth to a baby. That's an extremely unnatural, difficult position from which to give birth to a baby. It's a lot easier on all fours to pop the baby out. It just happens naturally. It just pops right out. But the other one is easier for the doctor, right? So like intubating somebody on their belly is well nigh impossible, right, for a physician, right? Like they're down there trying to like stick the tube in. That's just not going to happen. They're going to put you on your back, but then they might need to flip you over onto your belly later, right? So, and the earlier they put you on their belly in COVID, the better it often was, and you didn't often need to be ventilated. So, people learned all of these things. And but the main thing was like preventing the ARDS, the acute respiratory distress syndrome, from happening, and that was due to extreme inflammation, due to cytokine storm in most cases, which led all this fluid to flood the lungs, and breathing to become impossible without the ventilator forcing the oxygen in more pushing it in more forcefully. So there, when you really need a ventilator, there is no other option. You have to get the ventilator or die. It's just knowing whether that's really necessary is the big question, right? Like you have to trust the doctor to know when it's actually necessary and to tell you and to communicate it to you. And, you yourself can tell if you feel like you're just not able to breathe, right? You're like, and you feel suffocated, right? Like you can tell the guy that like, hey, I don't care what the monitor says. I really feel like I'm not getting enough air. That's not perfect either, because that can be, psychologically mediated. It can be anxiety related. So that's not perfect, certainly. But if you do feel like you can't breathe, you got to like tell them, you got to express it and make sure like, hey, are you sure that this thing is on me, or is it on the guy next to me? Right. Like, are you sure that monitor is connected to me? Because I don't feel like there's any oxygen coming in. So yeah, it's a complicated situation. Unfortunately, you're at the mercy of the situation that you're in if you let it get that bad. The practical take-home message here, if you really want to avoid a ventilator, is get a breathing machine at home so that you don't even end up in that situation. Get a med kit that has ivermectin and steroids and everything you need. Learn how to use it beforehand and start using it right away. But if you end up in the situation where you feel like you can't breathe, you have an oxygen machine sitting there at home. You get a prescription from me for an oxygen machine, oxygen concentrator, and it can give you 10 liters per minute of oxygen, which is, as strong as they get for home. And you stick that in and start breathing pure oxygen, right? At 10 liters a minute, instead of having to go to the hospital and get on the same thing over there and then, be exposed to all these blue lights and be kept up all night and all these alarms going off and you can't sleep well and be fed junk food. And, they stick you with all kinds of stuff and they put all kinds of medications in you and they don't tell you what's going on. And they may inject you with something without even letting you know, just because they assume that you would want it, et cetera, et cetera. So my point here is that like, avoiding the harm from being hospitalized will help you avoid being put on a ventilator. And the best way to avoid that is by not having to be hospitalized, because the hospitals don't know what they're doing. In a lot of cases, they do know how to save your life if you get to the point where you need your life saved emergently, right? So that's what hospitals are for in my mind, is like, I'm about to die. I need to be resuscitated. I need to be, because I've let it get too far, right? Any advice on how to overcome long-term H. pylori reflux and gastritis? So it's basically similar answers. The SIBO, you can scroll back in the recording, and even during the live stream, and hear the SIBO answer from Solid Oak when he asked the best approach to address SIBO. And you have to understand that H. pylori, I wrote a blog about this where I mentioned it, H. pylori. I think the blog post, the title was Never Kill the Wolves, H. pylori and You, maybe. It might have actually been in the title or the subtitle. So we talk about Yellowstone and how killing the wolves changed the entire ecosystem and moved the course of the rivers. And so the point here was, it was a metaphor for the ecosystem of your body and your stomach. And H. pylori may not actually be the villain that you think it is. So pathogens kind of carry, they can wear two hats. They can help you and they can appear to hurt you. And the reason I say appear to hurt you is because when you kill them, your symptoms may go away, but they may not have been, again, the deepest cause of your symptom, of your pathology. And you've just killed the messenger so that you're not getting the message anymore. And yet the problem remains, right? Like, my Lord, there are invaders at the gate, and you kill the messenger. It doesn't get rid of the invaders at the gate, right? They're still there. And if you don't do anything about it, they're going to break in eventually, right? So the earlier you know that they're there, the better you can deal with the situation, right? So it's the same with H. pylori. It's a messenger, and it's, responding to the environment that it's in, and it's in some way benefiting you, if only by telling you that there's a deeper problem here. So there's a lot of data showing H. pylori is actually literally beneficial for a lot of people, and it's been with us for eons. And it's not actually always quote unquote pathogenic. I would argue that it's probably never literally a barbarian at the gate, that the barbarian at the gate is somebody else. The H. pylori is the messenger telling you that they're there. So that's something you need to understand. Veritas Statum says, a friend of mine has a too small hypophysis. Result is too little cortisol, constant fatigue, and a bunch of life-altering symptoms. So if you have some sort of congenital abnormality, or you have, or you've been through some sort of surgery, right? In this case, he's talking about, I assume, the pituitary gland. So that can, as long as you have a functional organ there, like the pituitary, it can usually get bigger. Just like using a muscle makes it bigger, using the pituitary will make it bigger in most cases. So, if you have if you have actual thyroid tissue in your neck, you can usually revive it, even if you think it's dead. So the real issue for that person is going to be reviving their pituitary, not. So anyway, constant fatigue, a bunch of other life-altering symptoms. So sometimes you might need some short-term cortisol or some short-term steroids, to help you through. But ultimately, using them is going to further weaken the system that's supposed to produce them in the first place. So, this person can probably be healed, and it would probably be one of these, outstanding, remarkable kind of like stories. But I'm pretty sure that, unless there's something else I don't know here, that this person could be healed, and you could get them off of cortisol, and they could feel fantastic if they talked to somebody who knew what he was doing and got rid of the toxicity, pathogenicity, and nourished them appropriately. It's really all it is. Why didn't they feed unconscious diabetic patients on ventilators? Happened to a loved one who died. It's possible it was a mistake. I don't know. It depends on the exact situation, what happened. But usually with diabetics, they put them on a glucose drip and insulin, and they just maintain the blood sugar at what they think is the optimal level by, either increasing the sugar coming in through the artery, or sorry, the vein. So they increase the amount of sugar coming in through the vein, or the rate of it coming in, or they lower the insulin, or they raise the insulin, depending on what the situation may be. So they're kind of feeding them with sugar, which is, your body can utilize sugar to make fuel, obviously. And usually you're not going to put like a feeding tube into somebody's belly right away if they're not able to eat. If they're not able to eat for like weeks and you don't expect them to come off the ventilator, then that's when you usually put them on the feeding tube. And the reason they don't right away is because a feeding tube has dangers associated with it, right? Like you can kill somebody with a feeding tube. They can aspirate. You can have aspiration pneumonia where the contents going down the tube reflux back into your throat and then go down into your lungs, right? So they go down the wrong tube, right? So having something in your tooth, in your, sorry, not in your tooth, in your mouth and going down your throat stimulates the gag reflex, right? And yes, I mean, theoretically, they're supposed to be knocked out, knocked unconscious with all these, anesthetic drugs and stuff that put them under so that the gag reflex doesn't get stimulated. But sometimes they may become less, sedated, and they may have a gag reflex, and they may vomit stomach contents up, and they may go down into their lungs. This happens actually pretty frequently. Okay. So it's like a significant risk factor of putting a feeding tube. The other way is like doing like a surgical procedure where you stick in the tube from outside, going through their belly directly into their stomach. Obviously that has risks. That can leak, that can cause infections. You can perforate the wrong thing. I mean, like if you didn't do proper imaging, like the stomach might not be where you thought it was. Like in one situation, somebody was literally planning to put in a feeding tube on a patient, and they were all like scrunched up like this, and old, elderly, and their back, their spine was all tilted and bent, and the person was like, yeah, we're going to put in the feeding tube here where, the stomach's obviously there. I can hear it. Gurgle. And that's the way you usually do it. But then the guy was like, pressing around. He was like, it feels a little weird, right? And some people might have just gone ahead, but this guy had more experience, and he was like, I think we need to go and do an x-ray and just confirm the position of the stomach. And it was actually turned out the stomach was all the way up in the chest underneath the ribs, kind of compressing the lung, right? Not in the belly. And if he had put it in where he thought it should be, or where it sounded like it was, or where some people might have, felt that it was, even with, pressing with their hands, he would have perforated, the small intestine and caused, a severe, a leakage of stool into the abdomen, and, peritonitis, and probably killed the person. Right. And so, yeah, there are risks to that, obviously. And so it's just not done right away. There's another way to feed them, which is TPN, total parenteral nutrition. So parenteral just means through the IV, and total means more than just the glucose, more than just the sugar, also some proteins or amino acids and fats, right? And the problem with that is that can get infected too, and it can actually lead to bloodborne infections, right? So like obviously food also feeds pathogens like mold and fungi, and there's pathogens on your skin, and you have to puncture the skin in order to get the thing into the vein, into your blood. And so that whole system is not perfect, right? It's not a perfect delivery system. That can get infected and it can kill you. So the answer might have been somewhere in those reasons. Elite says, thank you for answering my question and easing my concerns of measles. Should my kids be infected? Always appreciate your guidance and insights. You're welcome. All right, everyone, thank you for watching. I know that there's a lot of other questions that we got over the course of the week. Let me just see if there's something really topical that I should answer before we call it a day. Somebody asks about osteoporosis. It can be treated. It has been very successfully treated by us and others. You definitely don't want to use Fosamax or the medications that they give you, because it gives you unnatural bone formation. And repeat DEXA scans might be okay, but the main thing is that you need to address the deepest root causes, which are in a lot of women going to include estrogen excess and cortisol excess, and the nervous system not in the parasympathetic mode, so it's actually increasing cortisol levels, which break down bone. And so it's basically a stress. It's a stress related situation. And so you need to get rid of the toxins, get rid of the pathogens. Those are what are causing you stress. And, do some breath work to help calm down your nervous system and eventually shift into parasympathetic mode where you're relaxed and you're like, a lot of people think that they're relaxed, and when they actually feel true relaxation, they realize that they've been tense their whole lives. Okay, so most people in the modern world, they don't even know what it feels like to be relaxed, and especially if you came from like a dysfunctional family, people screaming and shouting and hitting each other and whatever, and you've taken on those characteristics yourself, or even if you haven't, right? Like, you may never have relaxed, right? You may have always been like, wary, and you've got basically a form of PTSD. And until you fix that and actually relax, your body's going to reflect it. And the first sign of that is bad teeth, right? That happens way before osteoporosis hits, right? Like, your teeth are the first indicators that your bones aren't working, right? Like, they're an extension of your bones. And so the people who have the bad teeth, they're the ones who are under so much stress that their bones are starting to be resorbed, and it's starting with their teeth. So yeah, it's like the main answer is the stress, and the causes of the stress are multifarious. It's a multitude of causes, but also nourishment, right? Obviously, you need enough of the building blocks of bone, the phosphates and the all of the minerals and micronutrients that you need for bone. Obviously, the calcium, but you need calcium and phosphate, right? You need calcium and potassium. You need magnesium. You need everything, and you can't just focus on the calcium. Clearly, ivermectin is a top treatment for long COVID from Andrew Ball. A side effect of ivermectin is tremors. I got tremors in my leg when I got COVID. I took 4 days of ivermectin and stopped because it was impacting my vision. My pupils were uneven and my eyes were blurry. And that went away. The tremors did not. I'd like to try it again at a low dose for long COVID, including tremors, but I have no idea if the ivermectin caused the tremors or if COVID did. It's very unlikely that it was the ivermectin because it's extremely rare side effect. I mean, it just doesn't happen that often. So I would assume that it wasn't the ivermectin, but if your tremors get worse and you take ivermectin, then I would not take it. So yeah, the safest way to try anything is to start with a very low dose and gradually increase it, because you may actually not need the normal dose that other people need. You may find the benefit at a much lower dose. So this is something people just don't appreciate about medicine, is that dosing is always individual, right? Like, all we can say is that 80% of people, this is the dose that's going to work, right? But if you start having side effects, you can try a lower dose instead of removing the medication. And obviously, in an emergency situation, you just have to start with a dose, right? Like, and you got to usually start with a higher dose, because it's doing something, and it may not do that thing if you start at a very microscopic dose and gradually increase it, and you may not be able to get feedback from the person of how they feel and whatever. So you give like a dose range, or you give a starting dose that's going to work for most people and not cause side effects in the vast majority of people. And then if the person has side effects, one way to approach it is to decrease it. But that's in an emergency situation. You don't have to have that approach in a non-emergency, right? So you could start low and gradually increase until you feel side effects, and then you could pull back from that. And so that's what we generally recommend. Darlene, or if you want, or whatever dose you start at, if you get side effects, you just lower it and see if they go away, and then continue at a lower dose and see if it helps you. So go to the dose that's just below, that is just lower than the dose that might trigger side effects, and then stay on that dose and see how you feel for a while. Do you incorporate the latest stem cell activation technology using non-transdermal light therapy patches to elevate GHK copper to get rid of spike protein? I found that it knocks them out in 2 months' time. That sounds fantastic. I don't know if it's true, but it seems like it. The story seems plausible. Certainly, light therapy can stimulate stem cells, but whether a patch actually does that or not, I don't know. And actually does it to the degree that it needs to be done. What we tend to rely on is what we've seen works really well for people is red light and infrared light therapy. We use we recommend using the Biomax. I always forget the name of the company. That's the name of the product line. Platinum Therapy Lights, from Platinum Therapy Lights, the Biomax series. So I have the Biomax 450, and so that's what, and a sauna blanket, an infrared sauna blanket, is another thing that you can get from Heat Healers. They have a good one. No affiliation with me for either of them. So it's possible that the transdermal things work, but I don't know that it's a real dose and that it's really doing what it claims, or whether all of the people who've benefited from it had placebo effects. But and if you're a practitioner, let us know. I'd be interested in knowing if you've actually tested and seen that, tested for like spike antibodies or something and seen that they drop, and what kind of follow-up you have with everyone who tries this, and how certain you are of like the percentage of people who get rid of their spike protein in 2 months time. Because like the issue with every practitioner, I'm not saying it just if you are one, just you, but me as well, and Shabazz and everyone, anywhere in the world, is that the people that aren't benefiting right away, they tend to drop out and go see somebody else. And the people who are benefiting keep coming back usually. There will always be that tiny percentage of people who you're not able to figure out, and they just keep coming back. But if you can't figure it out after like 6 months or 12 months, eventually they leave also. And what you tell yourself is, if they had stayed stuck with me, I would have been able to fix them, right? Or they didn't do everything that I said, or whatever, right? So anyway, this is a risk, and why people oftentimes distrust what they hear from practitioners. They think that it's just and then there's going to always be placebo effects. So some people will always benefit no matter what they do, right? You could tell them to dance a jig every day in a certain way at a certain time under a full moon, and they would get better if they believe that it will make them better. So those are some of the things that I would consider. And this doesn't seem like it would be harmful at all. So I have no issue with people using it. But I don't use it. I don't rely on it myself. And maybe it's something that I should rely on, but I just need to know more about it before I tell people to go out and buy something that could be, beneficial, but might not be. Kimberly says, and LifeWave, I don't know if that's the one you're using. They've been around for decades. My mom used to use them back in I think the 90s. And a lot of people swear by them. So I'm not saying that they don't work, but I haven't seen really compelling science proving to me that they work, right? So and that's been my experience with most of these kind of companies. They're selling like a crystal or something to prevent EMF, and yes, that may be true, but there's no compelling reason to be certain that it's true, right? Even Shabazz is like, this, herb, there's a couple of studies I found that show that this herb helps to mitigate the effects of EMF. Okay, maybe, right? Certainly no reason no harm in, trying it. And you tell me that it made you feel better. And other people who have EMF toxicity also report that they feel better when they use a topical cream made from these herbs and whatever, so maybe, right? So it's a good working theory that this ancient wisdom is correct, and confirmed by a couple of modern studies in a lab, in certain cell cultures that have never been replicated, but you have to understand the context of our, modern society. We're in the midst of a replication crisis. Most of the time when you do a study and you see a positive result, and somebody else, and even you try to repeat your own study, half the time you don't get the same result and you can't replicate it. And more than half the time, other people who try to get the same result can't get the same result. And who knows why that is? Maybe certain conditions weren't exactly the same, and there were some conditions that you weren't aware of that were necessary to get the result that you got. And so, you have to take things with a grain of salt, right? But on the other hand, as long as there's no way something could actually harm you, then, certainly you could try it. But still, you have to be aware that you're not always going to know how something might throw off the body, right, in some way. Okay, so let's just see if there's any other. Amy also says, thank you. I always enjoy when I'm able to catch your streams. Thank you. All right. So I think that's a good stopping point. Thanks everyone for watching and showing up. It's always a pleasure to answer these questions and interact with everyone on a live stream. We'll keep trying to do this every Wednesday, same time, same place. All right, everyone. Let's see. Have a good day. Unless there's any last minute burning questions. Yes, there is. Okay. Laura says, how do we find out more about what you talked about earlier as far as getting treatment with Hakeem Shabazz if we believe we qualify for the kind of person you're looking for and willing to do all the work? mygotodoc.com/Hakeem. It's the same place that you would go to sign up. There should be a pop-up there where, and if there's not, just make a request or just email Brian. I think it's Brian at mygotodoc, BRYAN, but it could be BRIAN. But you could email Brian. You could email both of them. Brian with a Y and with an I. So email Brian and ask him to evaluate your situation to see whether you might be somebody that we could actually pay for to get better. Yes, the girl on the balcony. You can have a question. And just throw in the questions. You don't have to ask. If you can ask a question, just ask. Aisha Shump says, my GoToDoc website is blocked when sent to people through text, FYI. Let me see. There might be something weird going on with their phone, but it works for me. So let me try sending a text to somebody and then clicking the link just to be sure that also works. I go to doc.com. Yeah, I mean, it pulls up a link, which works for me. So not sure if you know, I mean, if more than one person has had this issue, I'll talk to my team and ask them if they can check on every mobile operating system and every, mobile browser, just to be sure that there's not some edge case that's not working. The girl on the balcony says, is there any available detox protocol for MMR as well as the DTaP vaccines? So there is no way to create a generic protocol that will work for anyone, but the principles are going to remain the same, that you want to detox aluminum, right? So silicon dioxide, interestingly, helps detox aluminum, and it's found in some water, right? So some water is high in silicon dioxide. For example, the stuff that comes from Fiji, I think, is high in silicon dioxide. But there's a lot of other things, right? Like you can use chlorella, and you can use activated charcoal, and you can use zeolite, and all these different things. The drawback to most of the detox binders, perhaps except for chlorella, is that they also may take out nutrients from your body. So you need to be on like super nutrition while you're doing them. You take them, you wait some time, allow them to work, and then you eat, maybe an hour or two after that. But you need to be replacing, because at the same time, you're probably malnourished chronically, like everyone is in the modern world, since our food doesn't have as much concentration of nutrients in it as it used to, and we don't eat the same variety or the same amount of nutritious foods as we used to, like organs and other things. So you have to replenish, and you have to reverse the effect of, removing even more than, removing some of what you're already deficient in by taking the binder. So basically, you have to remove the heavy metals that were there and other chemicals, right? So you have to, like, the way to detox is to optimize all your detox pathways and all your detox organs by nutrifying them, nourishing them properly, and supporting them, their functions with like organ meats, powdered organ meats, but raw ones work better, and fresh organs actually work better. So they're raw, desiccated, powdered organs that you can get in capsules. But what works like a charm, what actually works the best, is fresh raw organ that you just that you put in a blender and you just eat. put it into little freezer cubes and you eat it. So I know it's going to gross people out, but all I can tell you is what actually works the best. So you have to support the organs, and you have to make sure the detox pathways are open. You have to make sure you're having good bowel movements, and you're taking detox binders, and you're getting tons of fluids and stimulating urination, and you're sweating, regularly, and you're doing breath work, to calm down your system, to open up your detox pathways, and and then you have to dig deeper than that also. Because there are emotional and intellectual and different things that can help, that can prevent detox, or that lead you to not enter that parasympathetic state that allows detox to happen. And then you have to change your diet. You have to go on a very restrictive diet that stimulates your body to let go. It stimulates your body to enter spring cleaning mode, right? So what constitutes a healthy diet depends on your situation and what you need at that moment. So if you need detox, you oftentimes have to go on like a modified fast where you're not eating a ton of the foods that you would think are, like on the one hand, you have to like walk a fine line between, like, yes, you do need super nutrition because you're deficient. And at the same time, you also have to kind of do a modified fast where you're eliminating a lot of otherwise nutritious foods, but which might be, in your case, inflammatory. So things like dairy and even meat, right? So some of those things, but like a lot of meat, for example, like going carnivore, full on carnivore, sends you a building signal to your body, which is the opposite of spring cleaning or clean out signal, right? So spring cleaning requires breaking things down, destroying old, sick, weak tissues and letting them go and releasing the toxins from them and getting them out of your body. And building mode is something else. And the two obviously are always happening alongside each other, but to really focus on one versus the other requires shifting the input messages in that direction. And so some sort of modified fast, which means that like you're usually going to be getting much less calories, and but you're not usually going to be hungry because the calories that you are getting are extremely nutritious. So most of your calories are going to be coming from like a small amount of organs that you eat, and maybe like a raw egg and some multiple vegetable juices a day, and they're going to be providing all of the micronutrients, way more than your regular diet was providing. But they are usually not going to be providing a lot of calories along with it. And that low caloric signal is going to be part of the thing that stimulates your body to let go of fat stores also, right? So like toxins are stored in fat. So you have to lose fat to lose the toxins ultimately. And then you have to take pathogenic drugs, like antimicrobials, like chlorine dioxide, like, black walnut, like ivermectin in some cases, the more broad spectrum, the better. But there's a lot of different ones, and like garlic, like oregano. There's a lot, and which specific one is required for you, kind of depends on your case. And even if you require one at all, it just depends on your individual case, because your own immune system may be doing the job on its own, paring back the overgrowth of the pathogens. The pathogens themselves hold on to toxins. You kill them, the toxins are released. They have to leave your body through your detox pathways. Your immune system has to be awakened and stimulated so that it is slowly de-escalating the situation. You have pathogen overgrowth, and that's there for one reason. It's there is because those toxins are there, and you have excess, you have obesity and excess weight, and that's one reason that's there, is because it's holding on to toxins. And if you suddenly drop, lose the weight and lose the path and kill off all the pathogens, a flood of toxins enters your bloodstream, and it creates a traffic jam on its way out. So it's complicated. I mean, if it doesn't sound complicated, it is. And exactly how to approach it, and which person, and what sequence to do it, and what dosing, and so that they don't get overwhelmed and get sicker than they can handle, is that's where the art of the thing comes in. Okay, Aisha will check out the Android operating system and see what's going on. But you double check the link that you sent that it works when you click it, right? So just check that, in that message where you sent it, that it works for you, and then check that you wrote it correctly. And let me know, please. Laura says, is it true you aren't seeing patients? I'm a previous patient from a few years ago and called to ask about seeing you and told you aren't seeing patients because you're out of town and have to see an assistant. Yeah, for now, I'll probably resume. See, I'm not out of town anymore, but yeah, I have gotten overwhelmed with other stuff too. So if somebody really wants to heal, they should see Shabazz. I think Shabazz knows more than I do, and he certainly has way more experience with this method of healing that I'm trying to popularize on Twitter and everywhere in the world, which is like real deep healing. He is the only person in the world that I think actually knows what they're doing. And like I said, is reviving the lost art of real deep healing. So if that's what you're interested in, I would, recommend you don't see me even if I'm available. So, I just don't know how to do it. I know how to explain it, but explaining and doing are two different things, right? So he who knows does, or what? No. What is the saying? Like, he who can does and he who can't teaches, or something. I forget the exact wording of that, but anyway, yeah. So I see myself more as like the person, like, educating people on this approach that they should be following, but the specific protocol, like coming up with a specific protocol in a specific case, I don't think there's anyone else who matches him for now. I mean, eventually, hopefully I'll learn to do it as well as he does, and maybe he'll be able to teach other people, but we're not there yet. Okay, so holistic healing is probably defunct, which is I think that's the one where they're signing up for the free thing. So yeah. Okay, it's still working for me. mygotodoc.com/ maybe try it again if this was a while back, because I think that, like, I've told my team that you can't just like make any link defunct, right? Like, it always has to stay live, and please go back and check that all the links are live and that they haven't suddenly pointed to nowhere. But mygotodoc.com/ holistic-healing is working right now for me, so it should work. And it may not have been working before, because somebody told me some link wasn't working, or I saw myself some link wasn't working, and I told them, hey, you guys got to fix this. You got to make it work. So, but yeah, it points to the same place as mygotodoc.com / Hakeem. So that's an easier link to send. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Amy. So, yeah. I thought I was replying to, I thought Aisha had sent that. But yeah, so this is mygotodoc.com / Hakeem is the link for Hakeem Shabazz. If somebody's interested in deep healing, this is where they should go. Even if I start doing consults again, you should, and that's what you actually want is deep healing, then go there. Don't go to me. So, like, the people who come to me are the people who don't want that. They're like, oh, okay, that's way too much. I can't do all that. Just give me the pill, give me the ivermectin, give me the, and really, like, that is just a protocol approach, right? So people feel better when they talk to me about it, but you're basically going to get this, probably the same protocol, whether you talk to me or my assistant just gives you the protocol that I wrote, right? Which is like, okay, try ivermectin, try low-dose naltrexone. That doesn't work. Try low-dose steroids. That doesn't work. Try this, try that. So it's just like a throw everything and see what sticks kind of situation. It's not super hyper individualized, because it's just, and I do try to recommend, okay, do these lifestyle things and do this and do that, and try do a sauna and try eat differently, and all of those are part of my protocol, but most people they don't want to bother with all that stuff. But even still, and there's a bunch of herbs that I list and all this stuff, right? So all of the different things that Shabazz might tell you to do, might all be listed in one giant protocol by me, and they might be tried one by one. But when you try all of the right things at the same time, that's what's, makes, is the secret sauce with him. Like, you get an individualized, and he knows exactly which ones you need, and he can convince you that, like, hey, the sum of the effects is going to be more, it's going to be more than the sum of the parts, right? So the effect is going to be more than the sum of the parts. It's going to be synergistic, and you really have to do everything all at once. And yeah, it's a lot, but trust me. And he'll make you trust him, because and the way the trust comes is because he's had so much experience that he knows if you do what he tells you to do, you will get better. If you didn't get better, you didn't do what he said, right? So or there was something he didn't know about you or your past, or about your situation that wasn't, reported from you to him, or something changed along the way. So the initial protocol isn't always going to be the exact perfect thing that you need. You always have to come back and be like, oh, this happened, that happened. What about this? What about that? And then he'll, tweak it, and eventually you'll hit on the thing that works. It may take a few tweaks before you reach that. So that's part of the process of creating the individualized protocol, is getting the feedback. But I personally don't know how to do that yet, right? Like, okay, you do all this, you'll get better, right? I know it. I'm sure. Me and basically everyone else, Pierre Corey included, Dr. Mubin included, like literally everyone else is basically like fumbling around in the dark, being like, well, ivermectin worked for most of my patients, try ivermectin, right? So that's the basic approach to long COVID treatment. And some people will dress it up with like, oh, I'm going to do all these lab tests like Insol DX, right? Like, oh, look, you have this, cytokine elevated, and that one, is too low. So we're going to give you this herb to raise this cytokine that's low, and we're going to give this other herb or this other medication to lower the cytokine that's high, and we're going to like move the dials in all the right directions, and then you're going to get better. Yeah, like 80% of the time people feel better, but there's a lot of people who drop out, a lot of people who feel worse, and a lot of people who felt better who get worse again, because just moving the dials around on your own immune system isn't getting to the real deepest root cause. Okay. It's like misunderstanding what the root cause is, and thinking that the messenger is the barbarian at the gate, and really they're just the messenger, right? And sometimes, and certainly the messenger is trying to help you, but sometimes the messenger is like, from your own armed forces, right? Like they're part of your actual immune system, and you're killing them, right? Like the macrophages and stuff that are activated. Oh, the person doesn't even receive the text. I mean, that's weird. There may be some setting on at the service level provider, like the phone provider's level, that blocks out links from being sent over text to those people. So you could put a space so that it doesn't show up as a link. My go-to-doc space com, or whatever, or just email them. But yeah, I mean, that's all. I'm trying to figure, troubleshoot this. That's one thing that comes to mind, that maybe there's some sort of service provider level setting that, prevents them receiving spam messages with links in them, but also, they don't receive real links either. But yeah, that's what I can come up with. But let me know if that's the case or not. Okay, everyone, thank you for watching, and I will see you all hopefully next week, same time, same place. All right, bye-bye.